Do you guys mind if we go around and people sort of say with whom you are so we can have an idea? Someone just shout it out, doesn't matter.
Informal learning, the Pro Museum of Nature and Science.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Education publisher, Compass Learning.
Okay, great, fantastic.
I see some foundation.
Sid Richardson Foundation.
Okay, fantastic. So a couple of founders.
Stanford Children.
Great, okay.
Communities Foundation.
Communities Foundation, all right, so another
And
founder.
I'm a Dean of College of Ed, Texas Tech.
A foundation, okay, great, so higher education.
Awesome.
Awesome. All right, so that is very helpful, thank you.
Makes it more random.
Okay, so the second one, think about kind of where you are in your journey with respect to blended learning and what you'd like to accomplish in the next 2 years. So would you say that you're most likely to be thinking about creating proof points in individual schools of how blended learning might look in Texas? Is the second option, which is more supporting adoption of blended learning specifically within a school district or CMO, so a little bit more place-based maybe as opposed to proof points across the state. Are you thinking more about the third option, scale blended learning statewide? So how can you look at this from a state perspective and create the conditions across the state that might enable this to scale? Or D, which is also totally fine, I need to learn more about blended learning before I can answer the question. So we will start with A really quick. If you can give us how many people are all about the idea of proof points over the next couple of years. Okay, so a couple of
Can you
folks.
define proof point?
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah, so a proof point would be whether it's starting a new school or transforming an existing school, seeking to create examples of how blended learning might work in Texas. So that could mean any number of things. It could be saying, wow, I want to find in my city, I want to pick 4 schools and support them in a journey to blended learning so that I can use them as examples when showing other people what blended learning might look like in the state or in a city.
Or in a school, you could be doing it in a classroom.
Yeah.
You may know teachers that want to try this or something like that.
Absolutely. Okay, so we had a couple of folks on A. I'm sorry. Let me go back to the beginning. so let's actually vote. So, number of people who are most interested in proof points.
Oh, more?
Okay. Supporting the adoption of blended learning within a particular school or district. Okay, also a handful of people. Thinking about scale across the state. Okay. You guys are really awesome. You're diverse. I like it. And I need to learn more. That's where I am, and which is fantastic. Okay. Great. All right. The last question, and then we'll actually get right into it, is what is your goal? What are you hoping to leave today's session with? Looking at whether just learning about what blended learning actually is, thinking about implementation, or learning more about specific examples of blended learning. So we could start back with A. Okay, awesome. So consider how to implement blended learning within an organization. Okay, a couple folks there, and then learn about examples of blended learning in other states. Okay,
All right.
So that's where most people are. Awesome. So we will, I guess, spend just a little bit by way of brief background about some questions to consider and things like that, but then we'll dive right into the case studies.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we mean this to be as interactive as possible. So please don't. There's not a Q&A period that's coming later. Please feel free to dive in and ask questions as we go through this. So we'll get to the case studies as quickly as possible, but just really by way of background, especially because a couple of you were raising your hands in terms of thinking about proof points and thinking about adoption within individual organizations, and even considering scale. We think there are 6 questions that you want to think about when you're trying to figure out this idea of what blended learning is going to look like in the organization or in the city or in the state that you're considering. And really, I think the first one is, what problem are you trying to solve? There are so many ways that people come at this notion of blended learning, and we can come back to that if this is something that y'all want to dive in more on. But it could be that you're trying to solve an instructional problem, that you're looking at a particular gap that you're trying to fill, or a concern that you have about, you may be approaching this from the perspective of, we want to design a CMO that can scale as efficiently as possible, and therefore we need to be really thoughtful about real estate and facilities, and therefore build a model around that as one of its key goals and for that purpose. So all of those are different lenses and different ways to go, but so I think it's a really important thing to be honest up front about what that means and what that looks like.
One more lens in that's
Yes.
specific to the Texas landscape, I think, and right now what's going on in the session and everything, is access. And so you might be located somewhere where you may not be able to offer all of the classes you may want to offer or need to offer. And so blended learning is another way to think about incorporating and offering a more diverse and sort of powerful content curriculum base for your students. It's another specifically a technical I think that's relevant.
Yep, absolutely. And then I think the second big question, and we'll actually cover most of the rest of this when we dive into the case studies themselves, the second question is how disruptive do you want to be? Blended learning can mean knocking down walls, completely disrupting the way that you teach, bringing content from all different places and totally changing the notion of what school is. But blended learning can also mean using online courses to add AP courses to your high school catalog that you're not able to offer otherwise. Those both fit if you look at general definitions of blended learning, but are very different ideas, both totally worthy, but very different ideas when you're considering all of the questions that may be on your mind in terms of implementing a blended learning model or models within the organizations or the cities that you live in. So that's kind of a frame, and we'll consider other specific questions as we go through the case studies. But I think once you've kind of like gotten to that point, then you can start turning to the really specific questions of what's my instructional goal, what operational areas am I thinking to flex, what needs to stay traditional and what can move with me as I design my school model, what are the financial parameters that I'm trying to work within, and then what's the policy context in which I'm operating. In other words, what's the requirement of the particular state or district in which I work that might tell me, that might inform certain areas of my model design. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Okay, so with that, we will get to the case studies, and like I said, please jump in, and we'll probably bring Jeff up here at some point.
Do any of y'all have any questions on those questions or any other ones, depending on where you are in your journey toward blended, or at least thinking about in your head, that come to mind that we don't have up here? Yes?
Well, not so much a question, but I think, the initial idea of the blended was, you take the face-to-face instruction, and then you take the online instruction, and you do a certain percentage of each. I think what's happened over time is as people being online have seen the value of the features of online, whatever platform you might choose to use, that your face-to-face teacher is now becoming, I'm not sure what you're going to call it, but they're using a lot of those online features in their regular classrooms because they're just marvelous. And it's just a different variation, I guess, of the blended. So, rather than just thinking of blended as we used to think of it, I think the potential is even much, much larger.
That's a great point. And the fact that blended, you don't just go from one state and then you go to blended. Oftentimes what we're seeing now is you go from what has become a bit static state to this blended environment with which comes this concept of constant innovation. Because once you provide access to this technology and the new way of teaching and things like that, then teachers have access to different information and then think differently about the way that they're instructing their students. And then also, what can be done on the computer versus what can I do as a teacher or an educator? And then what are then all the other services we do as a school? How do those change potentially, but not change just to B from A, change now to B, but with the concept that it's going to go to C, D, E, because we are bringing in this sort of constant innovation. So it's a very, very great point that it's not just like, okay, go from here to here, and once I get here, it'll be hard, but then I'll get used to it. It actually does start to incent innovation and change the culture a little bit.
Absolutely, great. So a little bit before we get into the specific models, just kind of want to orient them and the investment approach that we took on, kind of the continuum that really is the national discussion, and that is the InnoSight Institute. So they are an amazing resource and have been very smart and super thoughtful about figuring out how to distill out all of the great work that's going on across the country and put it in buckets that have names and can be compared and contrasted to one another, and therefore give all of us kind of a place to start in terms of orienting ourselves when we're talking about blended learning models. And I guess the thing that I want to note really quickly, and then we can come back and talk about other models if you'd like, the 5 models that we're going to talk about are the 5 models that were a part of our innovation portfolio or investment portfolio over the last year. They are all CMOs, although that was not by design, that was just the way that it happened when we went through diligence. They are also all rotation models. And so the reason why I want to be really clear about this is I don't want you to leave here and think, wow, the only examples that are out there in other states in the country are rotation models. That's not true. They occupy a very specific point on a continuum of different blended learning options that includes very, very different ways of mixing online learning and live instruction. But what you'll see in the discussion that follows is three examples of a station rotation model and 2 examples of a lab rotation model. But just definitely know that the others are out there and incredibly different.
Can you just give a quick definition of station rotation versus lab rotation?
Yes, absolutely. So the notion at the highest level of a rotational model is that there are multiple learning modalities in the experience, at least one of which is online. Okay, so it could be that the other modalities are small group instruction, it could be large group instruction, it could be project-based learning, it could be individual practice, it could be lots of different, frankly, more traditional methods of instruction that we're all more familiar with. But the notion of a rotation is that students move from one modality to the next, and at least one of the modalities is online learning. A couple of things distinguish this version of rotation from others. One of which is that it's not chosen by the students. So this is either on some sort of fixed schedule or at teacher discretion, right? So kids don't get to pick in a rotation model which one they go to and why and all of that. That actually happens in other models. But rotation models are prescribed. The thing then that differentiates at the highest level is station rotation versus a lab rotation. Station rotations are generally in class. So those of you who are familiar with small group instruction that happens really commonly in elementary schools. You can imagine that there might be a room like this that has 4 or 5 different sets of tables or 4 or 5 different centers, and the kids are moving from one to the other. That's exactly what you might expect a station rotation classroom to look like. It just so happens that one of those centers, at least, will have online learning, and so you'll see computers or tablets or something like that. A lab rotation is the same idea, so kids are rotating from one modality to the next. But in a lab rotation model, all the computers are in a learning lab that's in a different place than the classroom. So if we were in a learning lab, we might be doing what we're doing right now, right? Pretty traditional mode of instruction, and then at our cue, you would get up and move to the next room, which has all computers, and you would log in to a computer. And that's what distinguishes a lab rotation. Yes?
What's CMO?
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. It's a charter management organization. And so it simply is just the organizational structure that governs a set or a system of charter management schools that belong to the same group. So KIPP Austin, for example, would be a CMO. Any other questions before we move on? Okay.
How many people have heard of Insight?
Okay, cool. Okay, awesome. So we will dive in, and I'm fairly certain these are in alphabetical order. So I'll give 2 seconds maybe of overview, and then Jeff and Kat, if y'all want to dive in, and we can feel free to dive in with questions because there's a lot we could talk about on each one. If you haven't had a chance just to give you a sense of the information base that FSG was awesome in producing, each one of these case studies is about 50 pages? Yeah. If that sounds, so we got lots of answers, or at the very least lots of information to discuss.
Do you want to do a quick 2 seconds on, since people were more interested sort of in proof points and things like that, talk about why we did the case studies and why we set them up the way that we did, because we too were interested in proof points and understanding them and really getting to a product that people could read.
So this was really set up as our own internal learning exercise that we're totally excited to share with everyone. So our question at the beginning of all of this was, what's blended learning? By the way, we'd made one investment in School of One previously, but didn't really know a whole lot else about the space, and wanted to set up for ourselves a series of learnings that would help inform our conversations about what might be next for the foundation, if anything, in the blended space.